Hey guys, welcome to my podcast, Coming Clean. I'm your host, Kylie Lewis, and I hope you enjoy this episode. All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. I have a returning guest with me, Abbie Bradford, but it's been so long since you've been on the podcast, and we didn't have video, so people may or may not remember or recognize you, but thanks for coming back.
It's great to be here. It's a fun topic.
Yeah, it is. So we're going to be talking about gut health and how it affects everything from allergies to anxiety and depression, immune issues, skin, hormones, and fibromyalgia too, which is really interesting. Mm-hmm. So I guess let's just start really basic, because I know this is a huge topic, right? Even if people aren't super health aware or they're not in touch with themselves, I think majority of people can admit that they've at least experienced some type of digestive issue in their life. Mm-hmm. And then there's so much coming out around, even if people don't know why, they're like, I should take probiotics, mm-hmm. right? It's like a trend. But let's start with talking about leaky gut and maybe what it is, and how might someone know that they have gut issues? Like, what shows up when you see people, right? So you're an RN, and you are a holistic practitioner, so you see people on a regular basis dealing with these things.
Yes. I think it's great to talk about this because it is one of the number one things that I see with patients. And it's not always blatant. It's not like, oh, I get cramping, I get bloating. You can have all those things. You can have constipation, loose stools. You can get the pain, you can get the bloating and gas, and those are signs that there's something that is off. But it's often much more subtle than that. It's often comes out in other ways that we would never think gut is the root cause. So leaky gut, the medical term is actually intestinal permeability, and so that means that permeable membrane, right? That means that membrane that is super thin, it's only one cell wall thick, that goes throughout our digestive system, and it has a little bit of openings. It should be very small openings so that the nutrients, the vitamins, all of the broken down nutrients that our body needs and our cells need can get through that small opening into the bloodstream. But because of a lot of different things like poor diet, inflammatory foods, birth control, steroids, alcohol, a lot of things will break down this barrier. And our body has its own innate ability to repair that barrier. But if it's every meal, every day, constant, that barrier can't repair itself, and that barrier tends to get more leaky, meaning that some undigested proteins and bigger molecules that our body does not normally have in the bloodstream get into these areas where our immune system is and our white blood cells are, and they start to react. And so that's kind of what we can talk about, is what happens when these white blood cells react. So I always kind of paint a picture, and like I think about these small little openings, like in between our fingers, if we can do this, and like that's normal. And then as there's more damage, that starts to open up and open up and open up. And so the more that happens, the more reactive our body becomes. And long term, that is a huge amount of inflammation. And so there are things that we can do to help that, of course. It's not all bad news, but it really takes us to be aware of what are we putting in our bodies, how much, and let's find, like I always say, the root cause of these other issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, gosh. I mean, it seems like a difficult topic because to a lot of people it's probably really overwhelming, because they might go, I have no idea if I have this issue, or I definitely know there's an issue, but I don't know how to start to fix it. Mm-hmm. So where do you usually start with people? Like, what's the beginning steps?
So what I do at Discovering Wellness, we look at live blood under the microscope, and it's actually really easy to see, because that tissue that starts to make those holes bigger and bigger, that tissue sloughs off, and we can actually see it in the bloodstream. It's very faint. It's like if you have a scratch on your skin and that really thin piece of skin comes off, we can see that in the bloodstream. So that's how I can see that. And when I see that in live blood, that means that it's happening currently, that it's happening right now. And we also do something called dry layers, which is dried blood. It can tell us more about what's happening on a systemic level, and that actually will show us leaky gut and food sensitivities as well. So those two things go together. So if someone has a food sensitivity, like say they're really reactive to gluten or dairy or even sugar sometimes. I mean, there's a whole list: egg, soy, corn. There's a lot of things people can react to. If you're reacting to a lot of foods, like if someone does an elimination diet and they start to put foods back in, and it can be anything from joint pain to brain fog to direct GI upset, we know that that's a reactive food, and there needs to be some deeper healing that happens. So we start by looking at in the live blood, but I also take a kind of a thorough history, and I get some clues into leaky gut. So if someone tells me, like we said, food sensitivities, if they tell me they have a lot of environmental allergies, if they have chronic sinus issues, their constant, runny nose, sinusitis type thing, I'm thinking about allergies. I'm thinking about what's going on in the gut. Why are you being so reactive? So we kind of start there at that assessment piece, and I just ask deeper questions. Some people come to me and they've never really paid attention too much to what their gut is doing. I've been constipated my whole life. And well, that's not normal. There's something going on. Or I eat this food and I have a bad reaction. I'm in the bathroom constantly or immediately. So it's really individualized, but there's definitely those kind of clues that we look at. And then we start to look at the immune system. If they have autoimmune thyroid, Hashimoto's, if they have really any autoimmune condition, is said to have leaky gut as one of the components. So if we just go on a little side tangent about autoimmune disease, what does that mean? It means that our immune system is either attacking what's known as self, so the tissue is our own and that it shouldn't be attacking, or it's attacking something that looks like our tissue. For example, with Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune thyroid disease, if someone has thyroid antibodies, that means their thyroid is making a molecule that's attacking the thyroid tissue. It shouldn't be doing that. We also know that the gluten molecule is so similar to thyroid tissue. When many women go gluten-free, their thyroid antibodies go down because the thyroid stops reacting to the gluten and the thyroid tissue in itself. So that's kind of a tangent, and I'll let you go on from there.
No, thank you for all that. So let's continue with that a little bit, because I think there's a tendency, and we've talked about this separately from the podcast, obviously, and on the podcast too, this sense of personal responsibility is so important, because when we are diagnosed with something, or when we have chronic pain or chronic digestive issues, it's so easy to try to find someone to blame or something to blame. And yeah, it might be a specific food that you could say this is the cause or this is making it worse, but we are the ones that get to choose what we put in our body and how much stress we take on, or how much we move, how much water we drink, all these things. And I think I recently heard, and I could be wrong, that autoimmune diseases are the leading cause of death, at least in the country. Is that true?
I think it's a component of most diseases, and there's a reason that, say even we could go into dementia and look at all these different diseases, heart disease, usually there's some sort of autoimmune component, but is that ever noticed or found by most doctors? Because like I said, it can be so subtle. The symptoms don't always relate to where it's coming from. So there is a huge possibility that autoimmune disease is, I think it's way more rampant that we know of, and I think it is probably a huge cause of many deaths.
Yeah, and so I guess I struggle in my mind. I think to myself, well, if you have any autoimmune disease or symptoms that are caused by things, basically a lifestyle disease, a lifestyle disorder, a lifestyle negative things happening because of your choices, that's the most difficult realization to have, because then you realize that you get to choose.
That's empowering too.
Yes, exactly. Which is, if you guys want to go back and listen to one of my first episodes, it was like at least within the first 10 episodes, I had Abbie on, and we talked about being your own health advocate, basically. And that's so important, because although there's Discovering Wellness in the Rockford area and outside of Rockford, there's tons of options for you. It really has to be about you, like diving into the research yourself and making sure that you have a voice and that you want to make a change, because this certainly isn't easy. At least for me, I've cut out dairy, I've cut out gluten, mostly refined sugars too. It's been helpful, but it's not been like a complete solution, because there's so many variables, right? And our mindset plays a huge role too.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think where most people, whether or not they're ready or even able to notice the physical components, maybe that's the first place they're aware, but some of us have more of awareness with our mood, with anxiety, depression. I mean, you're in Happy Healthy Women, which is my Facebook group, and that's probably the top issue that women are expressing.
Yeah.
That it's become so common for so many reasons, and many people turn to medication. Some people don't want to, but they feel like, well, what am I going to do? I can't just live like this.
Right.
I went through all of that myself.
Yeah.
But changing the way that I ate and really healing my gut, and I don't know if it's fully healed yet, but it's much better than it used to be. That made a huge difference on my emotional well-being. So can you talk about the link between the brain and gut health?
Yeah. So let me back up just a hair. So there's a lot more that goes on in our gut than just digestion and assimilation of nutrients. They say that between 70 and 90% of our immune system actually resides in our gut. And we have a ton of defense, our immune system, our defense system lining the gut, because we take in so much every day orally that goes in. Our body needs to be able to fight anything off, any pathogen, anything like that. Not only does our immune system reside there, but many of our neurotransmitters and our B vitamins are actually synthesized in the gut. So lots of serotonin, which leads to melatonin. Serotonin will turn into melatonin through the body's processes. Even like our dopamine and some other things are made and synthesized in the gut. A lot of B vitamins are synthesized in the gut. And what does this is good bacteria. So if that ratio of good bacteria is depleted or overgrown, or there's too much bad, not enough good, pathogenic bacteria, if any of that is off, that whole process either gets stopped or it's just not accurate. It's not functioning fully. So a lot of times when there's a lot of inflammation in the gut, or the gut isn't getting the nutrients that it needs, because we're not giving it enough with food, or the food doesn't have enough, or we're not supplementing properly, a lot of these molecules are not able to be fed to the bacteria, and they don't have the building blocks they need to make these neurotransmitters. So we can talk about anxiety. There's lots of causes of anxiety, but one of them is having low GABA. And GABA is like our feel-good, calming neurotransmitter. And if we don't get enough zinc and B6, our body cannot make GABA. So if we're not absorbing that because of the inflammatory state, the body literally cannot make it. So we're in this excitatory state where our brain cannot calm, and we just feel overwhelmed and we can't relax because the body can't make it. Same thing with the other neurotransmitters. If there's a lot of inflammation and not enough good bacteria to synthesize those things, it just doesn't happen. That process doesn't happen, so we become deficient. And then we start to seek like that dopamine rush from other things because we aren't getting it ourselves. So we need it from food, shopping, all those addictions. If there's yeast overgrowth and addiction to alcohol is very well known. And so that dysbiotic state of having too much yeast and not enough good bacteria to outweigh the yeast will cause us to not only be addicted to sugar, because the yeast want to eat sugar. They're going to tell our brain, I want sugar. And then also it's going to just allow that whole process, like I said, to not work properly. Mm-hmm. So a lot of addictions come from that as well, not having enough good bacteria. So depression can be linked to this as well because it ties in with the neurotransmitters. And there are some other like female hormones that are involved in the whole like feel-good process, like to make sure that we're motivated and happy and all those things. But a lot of it is made right in the gut.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating stuff. And I love that, I mean, it's just like pouring out new research all the time and like figuring out all these connections and how now it's known as the second brain. And not only does our brain communicate to our gut communicates to our brain. So it's just really mind-blowing.
It's actually, yes, they know now that so there's this third brain that they call the gut brain, basically. And they used to think that the brain talked to the gut mostly. It was a one-way kind of deal. They actually have proven that the gut talks to the brain more than the brain talks to the gut. So our gut is constantly giving the brain signals, telling it what to do, what we want, all those things. So the gut brain is huge.
Mm-hmm. So you said third brain, so what would be the second brain then?
So we've got there's kind of like two levels. Like we have our autonomic nervous system and our, what's the other one? Holy cow. Autonomic and, so you've got your parasympathetic and your sympathetic. Right. So one of them, that's under the autonomic nervous system. And there's some that we can control and some that we can't. And those are considered like the nervous systems. Right. So the gut-brain axis is considered third brain because I guess those are the other two.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. So I wanted to go back to what you were saying, a couple things, B6 and zinc. How would you recommend, or how do you recommend people get B6 and zinc? Because you said that's important for making GABA, is that right?
Yes, and lots of other processes. The Bs are super, super important for energy, metabolism, nerve health, so many things. So I typically, you can take those things separately, and if you get, you can do certain tests so that you can see specifically if you're deficient in B vitamins. But typically, I like people to just take a B complex because we really need all of them. And there's usually B1 through 12, skip a few numbers in between. That's pretty much the B complex. I like people to get it in a liquid form. We can also do it IV. I do it IV at the clinic for people that are really depleted, gut issues, aren't absorbing, that kind of thing. And that can really just, people wake up. It's like everything in their body starts to wake up when they get those nutrients. Wow. Doing it orally can work just as well. It takes a little bit longer, but doing a liquid one, I really like the brand Protocol for Life Balance. They have a great B complex. I think they actually call it B12, but it's a B complex. And zinc is really good to do orally as well. It can be a little nauseating if people don't get it with food, so you have to take it with food. But getting like just a plain supplement with zinc, especially if people have the little white dots on their nails, that can show them that they're very deficient in zinc.
I got a couple of those.
There's some blood tests that even just not random, the general blood test that doctors do. There's one liver enzyme called alkaline phosphatase, and that is a liver enzyme that tells us if it's really depleted. We know that it relates to zinc, basically. Mm-hmm. So we can get little clues here and there, but if anyone has like immune issues, they get sick a lot, zinc is a huge one. So I recommend like 50 milligrams to people and take that with food every day. Okay.
And do you have a specific brand for that one?
There's a couple that I like. I usually tell people to get, it's something called Tri-Zinc, just it's the 3 different kinds of zinc so that they can absorb the best.
Okay, we'll make sure to link that and the B complex you mentioned.
And then when we talk about gut healing, we'll talk about zinc again, because it comes up then too.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we definitely can dive into that. We'll just cover a couple more areas of what gut health affects, and then we'll make sure we leave plenty of time to talk about how to heal the gut, because that's really what most people listening are going to want to hear, because it may be pretty obvious that, I mean, would you agree that majority of people, at least in this country, have gut issues?
I have yet to see anyone coming in to see me, and of course usually there's something going on, but I do get some people that come in just preventatively, and usually everyone has some degree of it. Yeah.
And it makes sense, right? Considering the standard American diet, the amount of stress we take on.
Even if we have had 1 round of antibiotics, I mean, they're powerful, and they don't discriminate from good bacteria and bad bacteria. And so it's like putting a bomb in the gut, and it can really irritate and cause some leaky gut issues and just dysbiotic state, meaning not in balance.
So what if someone, I mean, because obviously there's a huge, basically antibiotics can be very powerful, right? They can be very helpful. I mean, if someone is dealing with something really serious, it can save their life.
Absolutely.
I know myself, I had a parasite. I had, what's it called? C. diff. And a lot of people die from C. diff.
Yeah.
And I now know I may have even gotten C. diff because I had been taking so many antibiotics, right?
Yeah.
So then to kill the C. diff, I had to take even more antibiotics. And I wasn't aware of probiotics at the time, or of even eating clean at all. This was when I was like 18, 17, I don't know, young. So looking back on that, and just like knowing how often I was sick, I mean, I had strep 5 times a year, so I took major antibiotics 5 times a year for a majority of my adolescence. But I'm saying this because I think a lot of people can relate, and I think as mothers or as parents, I'm sure it's difficult when they're hearing, you know, how harmful antibiotics can be. But if you have a sick child, it's like, well, what do you do? So let's say that someone has just taken antibiotics, or they've just given their child antibiotics, and maybe the answer is different for adult and child. What would you recommend the protocol, whether that's during, like before, during, or after, if you have to take antibiotics, or if you've already done it and you're like, oops.
So if it's just like a one-time occurrence, some people are on multiple rounds, so that might be a little bit different. But if you took 1 round of antibiotics, typically you want to be taking some high-dose probiotics, meaning over 50 billion, during the course, away from the antibiotics. So, you know, as far away as you can get it from the antibiotics, you can take those probiotics. And then you want to be on a high-dose probiotic at least for a month after. And you can taper down after, but you want to be on that high dose for at least a month.
So when you say far away from the antibiotic, do you mean within a day?
Yes.
Okay, like if you took the antibiotic in the morning, you take the probiotic at night or something?
Yeah, and most antibiotics are like every 12 hours or something like that. So however you can fit it in between, just so that we can try and not deplete all of that good bacteria.
So when it comes to probiotics, I know a lot of people think, one, that they can just drink a bunch of kombucha and they'll get their probiotics. So I'd love to debunk that. And also for them to be aware of they might actually be causing more issues, because a lot of kombucha has a lot of sugar, right? So they're going to feed the bad bacteria. And then the other thing is that not all probiotics are created equal. So even if it has maybe 50 billion plus, are they all good probiotic choices?
So most people can tolerate regular probiotics. There is a different kind. If anyone, we can talk about what SIBO is, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. That means that things ferment easily, and I think of it as like having a lot of weeds in the grass. And so you can't just throw grass seed on, it's going to feed them as well. So we need to take care of the SIBO first, but people can really, if they know that they have a lot of bloating and gas and some SIBO issues, a spore-forming probiotic is really good. I like the brand Thrive or Sporebiotic. Megaspore Biotic, I think is what it is. Those are really good. Those are not, you won't see those in like 50 billion or anything like that. They're different. They basically get further down into the intestinal tract so that they're not opening up in the small intestine. The other kinds of probiotics, there's a lot of different brands out there, and there's really no regulatory body that makes sure that it is what it says it is. So you have to stick with good brands. Garden of Life has been a staple for quite a while, although they were bought out by Nestle, so I'm a little hesitant sometimes to even recommend them. I still do use them sometimes. So all probiotics are not created equal, but you really have to just go with a brand that's trusted, and that's the only way we can really do it. So Renew Life is really good. Advanced Naturals is really good. VSL is really good as well. That's really high dose for when people have like C. diff and have been on long courses of antibiotics. VSL can be really good because that's usually over 100 billion up to 400 billion, I think.
Yeah, that's the one that I was taking for a while. Yeah. I'll make sure that we link all of these too, just because I know people have already commented and basically said, I want to take probiotics, but I don't know what to take. And then you might end up spending $100 a month or something on probiotics, and maybe they're not going to work. Also, is there a way that, like you said, so for instance, someone with SIBO, let's say, they have a lot of bloating, they want to start taking probiotics, but I received a question that said, I've been taking probiotics, but it causes constipation. Is that normal?
Okay, so that means that there is some additional overgrowth of bacteria that needs to be taken care of first. So if it constipates someone, usually meaning that we're kind of adding fuel to the fire. We're adding more bacteria when there's already too much bacteria. And the latest research on probiotics is not that we're actually inoculating the gut, meaning we're not giving these organisms and they're making a home there. They're actually kind of just passing through, but they're affecting the environment in a positive way most of the time. If people have a reaction like that, first of all, they want to make sure the probiotic does not contain any dairy. Sometimes they'll use dairy as some sort of additive or filler, and that can be constipating for some people that are sensitive. And secondly, there's probably some underlying overgrowth there that needs to be taken care of first before you can really make that good bacteria flourish.
So when you say that that needs to be taken care of, would you recommend then just maybe trying to avoid foods that would feed that bacteria?
That's part of it. Part of it is kind of starving the bacteria, and then the other part of it is making sure to take some antimicrobials, herbals that are a little bit more selective. So when we say antimicrobial, it's kind of like an antibiotic, but when we use herbals, they don't just go and wipe out every single bacteria. They're a lot more selective. That's why I love plant medicine, because it's made for us. It knows our body, and it can decipher between what is good, what is bad. I mean, we can still affect, if you're using some high-dose oregano oil, which is one of the most potent antimicrobials, for long periods of time, you're probably going to knock out some good bacteria too. But for short periods of time, using capsules of certain herbs can be really good. Even garlic. Garlic is really excellent antimicrobial. Olive leaf, like I said, a little bit of oregano, berberine. There's a lot of different products out there that have combinations that are really good. I like to use a combination that's called dysbiocide. That one works really well. It kind of depends on if I do a gut function test with someone, if I do some stool testing and I can see specific organisms that are overgrown, or if it's a parasite, or if it's because it can be parasitic versus bacterial, and that's where you kind of need a clinician, because you need to kind of figure it out what actually is overgrown, because there are different things that we would give if it was parasitic versus bacterial. But the nice thing about herbs is that you can use some of those ones that I mentioned, and they are kind of broad spectrum. So they will get to both of them.
Okay. Well, because there was a lot there, but it's good. Awesome. All right. Well, let's kind of dive into a few more of these areas that gut health can affect, and then you can just kind of go as much as you want on like how to heal the gut and whatever else you want to say. So you kind of touched on immunity, but let's go there. Let's talk about that and like what happens. People are getting sick all the time, or how does the immune system, like you said, it's literally in the gut. So talk about that a little bit.
So there's several reasons why someone would get sick constantly. One of them is having adrenal issues, but most of the time the adrenal issues aren't just solely that. There's some underlying cause, which can be gut issues and inflammation. So like we said, lots of immunity in the gut. There's something called secretory IgA. I'm get a little nerdy for a second here, and it is the main immune cell that we have lining all of our mucous membranes. So in our sinus cavity and all down the digestive tract, we have this first line defense, and it can be temporarily high if there's an infection. If those infections go long term, it tends to get depleted, and that secretory IgA gets very low. When that secretory IgA gets very low, you have hardly any defense of things in the mucous membranes coming in. Whether you're breathing in viruses or things when people around you are sick, if you're on an airplane and you're in a lot of that recircled air, if you're eating something that's been touched by viruses, you just don't have enough of that first line defense. So that's one way that can happen. The other way is that, like we talked about, those openings in the gut, if they continue to let big molecules in, say undigested protein, say it's a wheat protein, it's undigested, meaning it's bigger than it should be and it's not broken down. Our immune system is wonderful because it goes around and it flags these foreign molecules. That's part one of our immune system. It goes around and says, this is foreign, I don't like this. This is foreign, I don't like that. And that is a temporary inflammatory process because it's like flagging saying, hey, we don't like this over here. And so then part two of the immune system comes in and will take care of it and eliminate it. But if it, like I said, if it's happening continually, every meal, every day, for weeks and months and years, the immune system gets very depleted. That's a process that it can't keep up with continually because it's supposed to be short-term. It's meant to be short-term. So we talk about that low-grade chronic inflammation being at the root cause of a lot of things. So let's talk about environmental allergies, maybe. So that barrier to the gut is open, the immune system is reactive, so you get some pollen, you get dander, you get grass, whatever it is, you're breathing that in, and the immune system is in this excitatory, inflammatory, just overreactive state. So it's going to react to things that it normally wouldn't because it's already overreacting. So the white blood cells will actually release histamine, and I can see that under the microscope. There are these little granules that release, and it's basically a signal to the rest of the body. And the body needs to know, like, hey, there's some foreign particles here. We need to get rid of this. So again, an inflammatory process, short term, which is fine, but will just basically continue to be more and more reactive to things. It could be mold. It could be really anything. There's some people that are so reactive that they can only eat like 2 foods and they can't have their windows open when it's, nice out because there's too much stuff they react to. And that's when it gets to a point where that inflammatory process is out of control. The body can't stop it. It's on like this spiral, and it usually comes back to that overreactivity from the gut. Some other processes, like we can talk about fibromyalgia, that actually goes back to more like SIBO. So when the small intestine has too much bacteria, it's really not supposed to have much bacteria at all. It's more of like break down and assimilate nutrient area, and then we have this thing called the migrating motor complex, which happens in between meals, and it's like a sweeping action, and it kind of like eliminates any excess stuff in the small intestine. Due to antibiotics or food poisoning or a lot of different things, bacteria can start to colonize the small intestine, and instead of you breaking down and assimilating these nutrients, the bacteria are doing that for themselves. So you become very nutrient depleted. You have a lot of bloating and gas because those bacteria are basically, they have a byproduct too. They eat and they're gonna excrete, and that excretion is usually some sort of gas. And we test SIBO by testing that gas. We can tell how much bacteria is in there. It goes into the bloodstream and out the breath, and we test the breath.
Wow.
So this is very inflammatory because not only are you getting nutrient depleted, but those bacteria are causing this gas to go out throughout the body that shouldn't be there. It's hydrogen and it's methane, and those things shouldn't be in our system. And SIBO causes leaky gut as well because of this inflammation. And so they have linked fibromyalgia in many, many, many cases back to SIBO, and they know there is a link to those two things. So this inflammatory process that, I feel like I'm saying that a lot, but that's basically all that leaky gut is inflammation, and is what is the root of a lot of these issues like fibromyalgia. They don't actually know what causes fibromyalgia. Like the Western Medical Society they have no idea what causes it. It's basically diagnosed based off of a certain set of symptoms. And it's kind of one of those I don't know diagnosis. We don't know what's going on, but you have these symptoms, so we're going to classify it as fibromyalgia. But the root cause is inflammation, which they know comes from the gut.
Which then can be traced back, or at least started to be like solved and worked on or affected by your lifestyle, right?
Yes.
So, do you feel like it's a good time to kind of dive into that then? Because I think that's the biggest takeaway for people is, what can I do about this? Because it's pretty clear people, whether they're having acne, anxiety, constipation, diarrhea, brain fog, like you said, fibromyalgia, like the list can go on and on. So now what do they do about it?
So depending on where they're at, we definitely, if we know there's a gut issue, if someone has been dealing with something for a long time, I will a lot of times recommend the stool test that we have. It's very comprehensive, and it can look at all kinds of parasitic and bacterial, viral. It looks at gut markers like B6 and some nutrients. It can tell you if that secretory IgA is low or high. So that's one option.
And is that expensive to do?
It is around, I think it's around $300. Some insurances will pay for some of it. I know for sure Medicare will, but most people listening probably don't have that. So it's an FDA-approved test, and it looks for the DNA of these microbes. So most stool tests are very inaccurate because all they do is they culture the stool, and so if there's not that exact organism in the stool, it's not going to be found. And they also will look at it under the microscope, but if it's not in the sample that they're looking at, that small little piece, then they say, oh, it's negative. So there's many false negatives. This is DNA analysis, so it's looking for the DNA of these microbes, and they only need one sample, and it's very accurate. It's the best test that we have so far. So that's one option, is to look there. Like I said, depending on what else is going on, like if we look in the blood and we can see a lot of yeast, I know that yeast is overgrown way too much, and that alone can be the cause of bloating and some just GI upset sometimes, is having way too much yeast. If someone gets frequent yeast infections vaginally, fungus in the toes, oral, they call it thrush in the mouth, yeast issues, we know there's a systemic yeast issue and therefore a gut yeast issue, and we need to address that as well. So there are lots and lots of good herbal products that will address yeast and all of these bacteria. Pretty much anything from like OrthoMolecular products to Thorn, Who else do we use? Even Solar Ray has good products for that. And they usually all say something like Candida Cleanse, Candida Arrest, Candida Forte Yeast Cleanse, something like that. And they're usually a combination of like garlic, caprylic acid, olive leaf, oregano. That's probably the most common ones, and they're all different combinations, and they're all very good. But part of it is you have to not only kill it, but you have to starve it. So you have to stop eating. I mean, even not just yeast, but sugar will feed parasites and bacteria too. So sugar is the number one thing you've got to get rid of. Minimum 30 days. So some people, if it's really bad, it might take a couple months to really get rid of some of this. But yeast, anything with yeast in it, so breads have got to go, sugar's got to go, alcohol is a no. Those are all things that will feed, and this is just temporary, it's not forever, but it's got to be 100% so that we can starve it and then kill at the same time too.
And when it comes to alcohol, in general, alcohol kills off healthy bacteria, correct?
Yes, and it'll feed yeast. It'll cause inflammation in the gut, and it will feed yeast. So we all have a little bit of yeast, and that's good. We need that, but it will overgrow from our diet. Yeah, so, okay. So continuing down that path of things that they can add in, obviously, like you said, a lot of herbal supplements that they can add in to help, whether it's SIBO that they're dealing with, and obviously they might have to have a test done. But generally speaking, if someone's dealing with one of these issues and they're like, I can't afford a test, or I don't want to start there, they can at least start by avoiding sugar. My number one thing, if someone wants to do something at home, is do a 30-day, like, we'll call it a yeast cleanse. So avoiding sugar and alcohol, gluten and dairy. Dairy feeds yeast as well, and that means whey, so no whey. You really want to stick with the low sugar fruits, so berries, green apples, avocados, lemons, and limes. That's all you really want to do for fruits. Vegetables, there's really, some people say mushrooms, and I think they're okay. I think they're a different type of fungus. You really don't want to do anything fermented. Definitely not kombucha. So kombucha, if you make it at home and you make it where it's kind of sour and bitter, that's how kombucha is supposed to be. We have gotten into this now where you can get it in the store, you can get it on tap, and that's great. But they do it so that people want to buy more, which means it tastes really good and it's very sweet. Kombucha is made with either herbal tea or green or black tea, and they add sugar to it, so that's the part that ferments, basically. The bacteria will eat the sugar, create these other good bacteria. They put a SCOBY in it, which is like a yeast and bacteria culture, which is okay for a lot of people, but not when you're dealing with yeast, and I would highly recommend people stay away from that if they have gut issues, unless they're making it themselves and it's not very sweet. So we were talking about like gut health and what else to avoid.
You were saying
for the yeast. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else to avoid. You really just want to focus on whole foods, how they come out of the ground and not packaged. So your good quality meats, if you are a meat eater, you want to try and eat your grass-fed red meats if you can, just for the toxicity reasons and the omega-3s that are in that. Some gluten-free grains are okay. I think quinoa is okay for some people. Even I like wild rice and black rice and all the veggies and your good fats, your avocado, your olives, all those good fats, coconut oil. Some people tolerate ghee, which is that clarified butter. It doesn't have the casein protein in it, so people react a lot better to ghee. Focus on those really good, wholesome foods and stay away from the packaged and the sugary stuff.
Which is an important point to make when you say gluten-free, right? Because a lot of people, if they're not familiar with eating whole, real foods, then they'll see packaged foods that say gluten-free on them.
There's so many of them now, so you really have to be careful. The main ingredient in most of them is like white rice or corn or something like that, and there are some good quality ones that are gluten-free. You can find really good almond flour crackers and things, and I think those are okay. Not for every single day all the time, but you want to stay away from a lot of those gluten-free products. You just want to become a very avid label reader. You want to know what's in there. You want to know everything. Doesn't mean it's healthy or good just because it's gluten-free.
Yep. Amen. All right. So did you have anything else to add for gut healing, remedies for gut healing?
Yeah, so besides doing a little bit of that killing, we'll call it, if people are not having good bowel movements, that is key. You cannot kill off without eliminating. So that has got to happen. You can eat 3 to 4 prunes a day. Make sure you're getting at least 60 ounces of water minimum per day. Most people have no idea how much they're drinking, and it's usually not enough. Aloe juice can be really good for that. There are a couple little herbal moving blends for the bowels. I don't like people to use those as a first line, but they can really help if you really need some initial kind of assistance. And magnesium citrate is so good for a lot of people. You can use that every day. It does not become something that the bowels depend on, and that's really good. So I just have to put that in there too. As far as actual healing nutrients, we use a blend at the clinic called Glutashield, which has a blend of zinc carnosine. So zinc is super, that particular form of zinc is very healing to the gut. Glutamine, L-glutamine, is one of the most healing amino acids for that gut lining. It also has some other little amino acids in it that help, has aloe vera in it. Otherwise, if people just want to do the most basic, L-glutamine powder is probably the number one recommendation. You can find that almost anywhere, and I would recommend people do a powder, and so they can get 5 grams of L-glutamine in, so that's usually about a teaspoon.
And is that something you take right before you, or 30 minutes before you eat, or is it just any time?
Well, people take it for different reasons, because it also will help to build muscle back up after you work out. But if you're using it for gut healing, I like people to take it right before bed, actually. But you can do it a couple times a day, but at least one of those doses before bed, so that food isn't moving through and it gets to kind of touch the lining and just kind of soak in there while they're sleeping.
Okay, got it. Awesome. And again, lots of links in this description, more than any other episode, I think, which is awesome.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of actionable things people can, whether they're ordering products or just researching different things that can help them. I want to go back to, and I remembered something I wanted to ask you about, which is coffee enemas. If you can talk about coffee enemas. I know, again, another trend that's, if you're living in California, it's I do a coffee enema every day. And then here it's what the hell are you talking about? So can you just briefly describe what that is, the power of it, and how healing it can really be for our liver, our overall wellness?
So when people think of an enema, they think people do that when they're constipated, but coffee enemas have a totally different purpose. They actually go through the colon into what is called the portal vein, and it really helps the liver basically dump toxins. So if someone's really toxic, and we can determine that based off of history or what I see in the blood analysis, or if they've had other blood work, and they know that they if they don't sweat, if they get migraines, if they don't eliminate well, we know that they're probably a little bit toxic. And so we don't want to do a lot of killing first. We need to get some of those elimination pathways, like the colon, like the liver, like the lymphatic system, to start moving first before we just kill a bunch of stuff off and make them feel worse. Coffee enemas are one of those avenues, basically. So most people that are sensitive to caffeine don't get really much sensitivity to these coffee enemas. So it is inserted rectally. They put it into their colon, and you hold it as long as you can, up to 15 minutes. And you can do little spurts, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, up to 15. And
consecutively?
Right. So some people can't hold it, basically. So if you need to just start doing a minute or two, or if you not even that, just start with what you can do. And I'll give you a link to a really good video that people can it's an explanatory video of how to go through the entire process.
Yeah.
It has to be warm. Some people forget that and they get crampy. It has to be warm, but
and not as hot as you would drink.
Not hot and not cold.
Okay.
Both of those are bad. It has to be about body temperature or around there, so that you don't cramp or feel nauseous. But basically, it just sits in the colon. It gets absorbed through the portal vein. It helps the liver dump toxins to be eliminated through the stool later on. And it's a really good way. It's actually very ancient. They've used that for thousands of years as one of those tools to help people that are just really stuck and toxic, and especially for those that are really depleted too. That can really help. So the type of coffee is important. Light roasted, organic. Have to use some sort of like distilled water. Can't use tap water. And that usually says it all in the video, so we can link that too.
Definitely, I'll link that. And that's good to know. I didn't realize that that's an important piece to do, but it makes a lot of sense because, like you said, you could feel worse if you go in and you kill off all this bad bacteria and it can't even be eliminated from your body. Then it just sits there. So if you've got to clear those pathways so that you can actually eliminate the bad bacteria.
And two, for some people that if they're having any sort of die-off reaction, we call it a Herxheimer reaction. So once they start doing the killing process, if they do feel worse, if they start to get headaches, or if they start to feel way more fatigued, or if they get lots of cramping or something, they can actually take a binder an hour after they take those herbal antimicrobials, and that will help to bind everything and get it out of the system so it doesn't recirculate if they do have some elimination issues.
Interesting.
So binders would include like charcoal. You can find one. We have one that's called GI Detox. There's a lot of different binders out there that are comprehensive, so there's more than one product in it, more than one ingredient, and it really helps to bind that junk and just get it out.
And can you take that by itself, or you have to take that with...
You can take it by itself. Like a lot of times, like if I decide that I'm going to have like a drink, I'll take some charcoal afterwards because I know my body doesn't love that, even though I'll try to choose the cleanest possible, like Tito's vodka or something. I'll take charcoal because it binds that stuff and helps to get it out of the body. So you can take it on its own. But you have to be careful about binders because they do bind other supplements and food, and so it kind of has to be away from food and supplements by a couple hours. Yeah.
Because it'll take the good stuff too.
Right.
Yeah, makes sense. And isn't it true that like activated charcoal can dehydrate you as well? Is that true?
If you take a lot of it for like consecutive periods of time, it binds everything.
Right.
It'll bind. It absorbs. I don't know how much times its own weight. But that's true for most binders.
Right. And people should already be drinking more water. And if they're drinking alcohol, definitely drinking more water.
And if they're doing a little like cleanse, if they're trying to get rid of yeast or clean out the gut, you've got to get on the water. They say at least half your body weight in ounces minimum.
Yep.
And if you're sweating, yes,
I got my big one.
If you're sweating, if you're exercising, you got to up it even more.
Definitely. Awesome. So to finish up, I guess, the last few minutes before I ask you a couple questions that are unrelated to gut health. Okay. We already answered like a couple of questions people had asked, but one of them is specific to dairy. It says dairy gives me a stomach ache. Is that normal? Do you see this a lot?
So yeah, usually dairy tends to be constipating for some people. If it gives them like an actual pain, that's a definite sensitivity, and I would stay away from that as much as possible. And incorporate some of those gut healing methods too.
And just going along with this, I think it's so funny. I've heard so many people talk about whether it's gluten or dairy, but it seems like dairy is like the real difficult one for people to give up because it's like so comforting, it's like, but it's, like queso or whatever. I just
can't give up cheese.
Yeah. And I've always had dairy issues since I was really, really young. So it wasn't that hard for me to give up, although I loved the taste of it. But to me, the negative symptoms outweighed the joy of eating cheese.
Right.
So yeah, I think this segues into the last question, which was from a listener as well. And she asked, what's your advice to someone who has a family member who has some issues they're dealing with, or maybe someone listening, right? I know there are people listening right now that know they don't do well with dairy, or that know they might not do well with gluten, or they eat too much sugar, or they have gut issues, but they just don't want to give that thing or those things up to make this change.
Yeah.
What's your advice? What have you done with your patients, if anything, to help with that emotional side of letting go of these comfort foods?
Yeah, I can just go back to my own story and think about how I implemented things very slowly. Like, I knew that I was gluten sensitive. I knew that I had thyroid antibodies, and that when I did stay gluten-free, my antibodies would go down immensely, hundreds. And knowing that in my head, it was still hard, because for me, it was like breads. Bread is so comforting. Love bread. I've always loved bread my whole life. And it had to start slow, because if they're just fed up and they're ready, like if they're emotionally ready just to make a huge change, you can go in and change everything in your fridge to your products to make everything very clean, and that's fine. And some people do well with that. Most people need a gradual change. I know that if, like, say I have a family member that would benefit from some of this knowledge, but they're not ready to make a change, I will never be able to force them. And if I do force them, it's going to push them away from me. And so I guess my advice would be to start really basic and really slow. Start to change the kind of water that they drink and how much they consume. Start to switch over to coconut milk instead of regular milk. Start to use more stevia instead of regular sugar in their coffee. Little, like, subtle changes like that will be huge to them, because a lot of people are very resistant to change, especially as we get older and we're set in our ways. So some people I have to start really, really slow with and just give them alternatives. Okay, instead of this regular pasta that you love, we're going to switch to gluten-free pasta. Even though that's not where I want you to end up, and I don't want you to eat that every day, it's a change that we can make right now. Start to incorporate more vegetables and a variety of vegetables. And it's really hard if someone has never eaten vegetables and they never grew up eating vegetables. But just like steaming a little bit of broccoli and putting some butter on it is better than not having any broccoli at all. And so it doesn't have to be broccoli, it can be greens. Start to incorporate a greens powder so that it actually tastes good and they're getting some nutrients. There's a lot of little subtle things that aren't the end goal, but will get us closer to the end goal. And just keep in mind that, if it's a parent or someone that we're thinking of that, they could really benefit from this, we can only be the best example. We can't force them to do it themselves. So if I'm doing it and I'm seeing results and I feel good and I'm really passionate and empowered about it, they're going to see that and hopefully want the same. And then just little subtle hints, like I said, about changing some of those things that will get us closer to where we want to be.
Definitely great advice that I too would give, and I've experienced when you get excited and you know what's possible, you want to share it with everybody, especially the people you love.
Yeah. And
then you can push, and then they'll push back, and it just doesn't work for anybody. It doesn't feel good either. So being that example is huge. Starting small, I would say, for certain things worked for me. Like you said, for some people it needs to be gradual change. I did that with gluten because I kept denying that it was the thing. I'm like, well, I think it's all right. I'll just have a little bit here and there. And then it was what I think what people can maybe relate to, and this is where we need to just have more discipline within ourselves, is that every time you have a negative experience, part of you knows what caused it, and then you can justify it all you want. And we almost, even if you say, okay, gosh, I ate that dairy last night, I had a terrible backache, stomachache, headache, that would be me, and then I will not eat it. I'll just say I'm not going to eat it for 2 months, and then you forget, or you allow yourself to pretend that you forget, it, and then you eat it again, and then you feel the symptom again. And that's why it's like, well, there's nothing serious going on here. You just have to continuously be reminded, and if you make those mistakes again, your body's going to tell you.
Yeah.
And you just have to choose again. But then when it goes to other things, it's for me very much like some things you have to just cold turkey cut it out, but like you said, you have to be ready for that.
You do. And it was so hard for me to like eliminate gluten, and it's still like, you know, because I'll never stop loving bread probably. It's just one of those comforting things to me. And sometimes I'll allow myself to have some gluten-free bread or something, but it's definitely not a staple. But it took years for me to really realize, because my symptoms were so when I ate bread, they were so blatant. I felt so much better when I didn't have it. And it became more of that. I wanted more of feeling well, of those symptoms. I mean, they were miserable. Like, my eyes would itch. They would be so red. I wanted to scratch my eyeballs out. I would sneeze. I would get a sinus infection. But it was miserable. And so when we start to feel better from the changes that we make, it motivates us to do more and do better each time. And they just typically start lasting longer and longer, you know, the more that we do it. And hopefully that just keeps us going with that momentum.
Yeah, that's so true. Once you taste that feeling of like true health and wellness and energy,
and you see symptoms go away, and your joint pain's gone, and your brain fog, and you sleep better, and you're like, I want to stay like this.
Yeah. That's the best. Yeah. That's the place you want to get.
And not guilting or shaming ourselves when we do fall off. We can always get back on it anytime.
Yep, definitely. And I just want to add one last piece, which is what was so helpful for me, which is like you talked about, just start adding good things in. Like, yes, you're going to have to cut the bad things out because those are causing symptoms, but you're also starving for nutrients. And it's so much easier for the brain to focus on addition rather than subtraction.
What I can't have.
Yeah. And that's where I started, which was just getting excited. Like my t-shirt says, eat more kale, right? Yeah. Like that's where my brain was focused.
Yeah.
To drink more water, to eat more greens, to juice, to blend a smoothie and have fun with making, you know, different concoctions. And now like you do with your potions in the morning, like
elixirs,
yeah. It's so fun when you get to start adding those things in, and your brain doesn't feel then like you're going to be depleted or like you're depriving yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So last questions for you, having nothing to do with gut health, which is a two-part question that I ask everybody, and that is, what do you want more of in your life, and what do you want to come clean of, or what are you currently coming clean of?
More of. Right now, I need more outside time. I need to be hiking in the trees. I love that. That, like, I feel calm. I feel energized at the same time. I need more outside instead of behind a desk, or I don't really sit at a desk much, but indoors. I crave that. I feel like that is like my downtime. So I need more of that. What do I need to come clean of? It's springtime, and I feel like I need to come clean of some physical things and just like clean out. Like I physically need to just the clutter, like in my mind, physically in my house, things that accumulate over the winter. It tends to be a very hibernating kind of time where you just, I'll do it later. And I feel like I need to come clean physically and do a nice clean out, and that to me is very stress relieving.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
Some journaling too, get that cluttered mind out of there.
Yeah. Love it. Awesome.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here again. I think this was your third time.
I think
maybe
so.
Fourth. I'm not sure.
Third, I think so.
Yeah. And there's so much more we could talk about on this topic, but at least we can send everybody in the direction of whether it's Discovering Wellness to find you in person. Do you do free consultations or phone calls?
People can email me if they have any questions. Okay. That's kind of the easiest way. If they have any questions about if it's a good fit. So it's my first and last name, abbie.bradfordRN@gmail.com.
Okay. I'll make sure to link that for them too.
Yeah, great.
So if they're in the Rockford area, or even if they're not in the Rockford area, you also work remotely, right?
Yeah, yep.
Cool.
Absolutely.
If they're interested in those tests, or they want to come see you for live blood analysis, or whatever it is that they need help with. Otherwise, they have a lot of links to check out, some products to look at if they know what they need, and more exploration and play.
There's always, if there is any symptoms going on, there is always an underlying reason. And if people will just keep on looking for that, looking for someone to help them with that, if they can't do it on their own, we can overcome that. There are those root causes, whether it's a gut issue or not, we'll find it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this episode. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy life to hang out with me and my guest. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please feel free to share it with a friend, anyone who you think could benefit from this conversation. And also send me a message or a comment or an email, wherever you find me. Connect with me and let me know, why did you enjoy this episode? Did you have any aha moments? Were there any times where you heard us say something that you didn't even think about before? Just let me know so that I know that you're listening, and I just really appreciate your feedback. So I look forward to talking to you all next time. Thanks again. Bye.